You walk the docks like a proud conductor, hearing every crane and whistle as proof your orchestra still obeys your raised hand. In 2025, the air tastes of arguments, and you smile anyway, pretending the shouting is only weather passing over steel and salt. Your routes are veins on a map, and each stamp on each crate feels like a heartbeat you can still count and command. Then invoices arrive like pale letters from strangers, and you notice the paper is heavier than it should be, as if damp with debt. Partners who once joked on late calls now speak in clipped prayers, asking for assurance with voices that won't meet your eyes. You sign guarantees the way a sleeper signs dreams, thinking the ink is harmless, not realizing it is a thin leash tightening politely. A banker's handshake lingers too long, warm as sympathy, and you feel your pulse answering to someone else's rhythm beneath your sleeve. The ships still come, but they arrive like reluctant guests, late and silent, carrying fewer crates and more unspoken conditions. You begin paying for peace in small coins of pride, agreeing to terms you would have laughed at when the world still feared your schedules. Each delay becomes a mirror, and in it you see your face calm, rehearsed while your shadow behind you grows taller and more familiar. You blame storms, strikes, and bad luck. Yet, the real pressure comes from quiet rooms, where numbers are used like knives without a shine. A supplier calls to say, "We must protect ourselves," and the sentence lands softly, the way a door closes when you are still speaking. You start counting days like rations, measuring hope in hours, watching containers stack like coffins you can't afford to bury. Credit lines that once felt like bridges now feel like tunnels, and you walk them hearing water drip, wondering who sealed the exits. You promise everyone the jam will clear, but your voice sounds borrowed, as if the words belong to a stranger wearing your coat. A new fee appears, then another, and you accept them like bites from a tame dog that has learned your fear. Your allies trade favors behind curtains, and you sense your name being used as collateral, folded carefully, passed hand to hand. At night, you dream of ropes across oceans, knots tied in boardrooms, and you wake to the same knot sitting quietly in your chest. You realize the fights are not on seas or streets, but in contracts that turn love into rent and trust into interest you cannot escape. Still, you stand at the harbor at dawn, watching the horizon, knowing the next ship will cost you something you cannot replace. You tell yourself endurance is strength, repeating it like a hymn while your shoulders ache from holding promises that were never meant to be carried. Meetings multiply, and every chair feels slightly angled against you, as if the room itself has decided where you should sit. You notice silence becoming expensive, because every unanswered call grows interest while you hesitate, hoping time will forgive you. A port official shrugs and says, "New rules," and you hear the phrase settle like dust on everything you once kept clean. You begin trading speed for permission, moving slower, bowing lower, pretending patience is a strategy instead of a tax. Old maps stop helping, because the lines now move at night, redrawn by hands that never introduce themselves. You sense your choices shrinking, corridors narrowing, until every decision feels pre-approved by someone who never appeared. Insurance arrives disguised as care, wrapping you tightly, so tightly until breathing itself feels like a negotiated act. A missed shipment becomes a story others tell about you, and you hear your reputation being edited without your consent. You try to compensate with charm and history, reminding everyone who you were, not noticing how past tense fills the room. Costs creep in sideways, never announcing themselves, just standing closer each day until you feel their breath on your neck. You wake before dawn counting obligations instead of hours, realizing sleep has started charging rent inside your head. Advisors nod and recommend calm, but their eyes already scan exits, measuring how fast they can leave your shadow. You accept another condition to keep things moving, and the word temporary begins to sound like a private joke. A smaller player refuses you, politely, and the refusal hurts more than an attack because it feels earned. You feel watched by ledgers, judged by signatures, as if paper has learned to remember every time you flinched. The flow slows again, and you sense the world testing how much pressure you can bear before shape gives way. You reassure your people with practiced calm, even as your hands shake slightly, betraying conversations you never share. Somewhere far away, value is being reassigned, and you are no longer at the table where the chalk marks are drawn. You realize control was never taken from you violently. It is simply being charged back to you, piece by piece. You stop asking when relief will come, because the question itself has begun to feel like a bill nobody intends to pay. Every favor now carries weight, and when offered, it bends the room slightly, like gravity changing without warning. You notice others speaking over you gently, as if protecting you from decisions already made somewhere you cannot reach. Your calendar fills with apologies instead of plans, and each one costs a little more dignity than the last. Warehouses echo differently now, hollow and patient, as if waiting for you to admit what you already know. You start measuring survival in extensions, celebrating delays the way victories used to be celebrated. A friendly email arrives late at night, warm in tone, cold in meaning, asking how much more you can adjust. You realize adjustment is another word for shrinking, for folding yourself to fit a box designed by someone else. Small disruptions ripple outward, and suddenly your name is used as an example in rooms you will never enter. You sense confidence leaving you quietly, like a trusted aide slipping out before the building locks. The cost of moving anything rises again, and you feel motion itself becoming a luxury item. You catch yourself rehearsing explanations to people who no longer ask questions. An old rival offers help with a smile that feels rehearsed, and you understand the price will be remembering this moment. You sign another amendment, and the document feels alive, shifting slightly, learning how you surrender. Days blur into negotiations, nights into calculation, until time itself seems to invoice you for existing. You notice fear no longer spikes. It settles, spreads evenly, and becomes the background color of every thought. A missed connection somewhere far away triggers consequences here, proving how little distance protects you now. You think about letting something fail on purpose, just to feel the clean honesty of a break. Instead, you hold everything together with tired hands, knowing the strain is now the point. You finally admit you are no longer steering the system, you are merely paying to remain inside it. You stop pretending recovery is ahead and begin managing decline like a delicate operation that must not alarm the patient. Every message you send is softened, padded, careful not to trigger clauses that sleep lightly and wake hungry. You learn which words slow penalties and which ones accelerate them, speaking now in a dialect shaped by caution. Movement resumes briefly, just enough to keep hope breathing, just enough to justify another round of concessions. You sense observers mistaking survival for strength, applauding you for enduring what they quietly profit from. A routine payment fails once, and the silence afterward feels louder than any accusation could have been. You rush to explain before anyone asks, realizing explanation itself has become a form of currency. The system responds politely, efficiently, as if pleased you finally understand how to behave inside it. You begin anticipating demands before they arrive, saving others the trouble of tightening the screws. Flexibility becomes your virtue, though it looks suspiciously like surrender when reflected back at you. You notice pride leaving last, clinging stubbornly even as everything else has already been itemized. A promise from years ago resurfaces, quoted carefully, used now as evidence against your present self. You start framing losses as choices, telling yourself this was always the smarter path. Each compromise redraws your outline, until you struggle to recognize the shape you once defended. You feel time compress, deadlines overlapping, breathing spaces removed, pressure smoothing you flat. Somewhere, someone thanks you for cooperation, and the gratitude feels heavier than blame. You no longer ask what is fair, only what will keep the doors open another morning. The cost of stopping now looks higher than continuing, and you understand how traps remain humane. You sense the story ending before it ends, a quiet conclusion written in margins you never sign. Still, you prepare for tomorrow, because continuation has replaced victory as your final objective. You realize the language of survival has replaced ambition entirely, and nobody corrects you when you stop using the old words. Each morning opens like an invoice, already itemized, daring you to argue with charges you no longer recognize. You hear optimism elsewhere, loud and confident, and understand it is being financed by your quiet restraint. A small efficiency is praised publicly while its hidden cost is sent privately, folded neatly into tomorrow. You start measuring success by absence of disaster, setting the bar low enough to crawl beneath it. Every concession buys silence, never freedom, and the silence grows heavier the more you purchase it. You notice how dependency feels gentle at first, like guidance, before it becomes direction, then obligation. The routes you once commanded now dictate terms to you, turning familiarity into leverage. You adapt faster, nod sooner, sign earlier, proud of how little resistance remains. Your reflection looks thinner, streamlined, optimized for endurance rather than purpose. A new requirement arrives labeled standard, and you laugh quietly at how standards always move away from you. You stop announcing changes because nobody waits for the announcement anymore. The future shrinks into manageable windows, quarters, extensions, small enough not to threaten your resolve. You feel relief when nothing breaks today, mistaking stability for safety. Somewhere, leverage shifts again, and you sense it only by the tightening around your margins. You think about legacy, then quickly return to logistics, because legacy does not clear balances. Your story is now told by others as a lesson, and you are still alive inside it. You accept being necessary without being respected, present without being powerful. The system hums steadily, fed by your compliance, indifferent to your fatigue. You remain standing, not because you are winning, but because collapse has been priced just out of reach. You learn how to smile without revealing teeth, because honesty has become a liability you cannot insure anymore. The days feel leased rather than owned, each one renewed reluctantly after review by unseen hands. You notice how requests now arrive framed as inevitabilities, leaving you only the illusion of consent. A system update promises efficiency, but you hear the familiar sound of another lock quietly clicking shut. You begin storing energy instead of spending it, conserving yourself the way dwindling reserves are guarded. Every compromise is documented carefully, not to protect you, but to remember how compliant you can be. You watch opportunity pass nearby, close enough to feel the draft, but fenced off by terms you already signed. Your influence survives only as precedent, cited politely while your presence fades from the room. You stop resisting small losses because fighting them attracts attention you can no longer afford. The narrative around you softens, praising resilience while quietly accepting your reduced horizon. You sense relief in others when you agree quickly, as if your hesitation had been an inconvenience. Another dependency forms, subtle and reasonable, adding one more thread to a net you pretend not to see. You think of escape briefly, then calculate the exit costs and return to standing still. Stability becomes a performance, repeated daily so convincingly you almost believe it yourself. You notice how power now flows around you, using you as a conduit rather than a source. Each obligation renews automatically, and you realize forgetting is now more dangerous than failing. The margin for error disappears quietly, replaced by tolerance only for obedience. You feel smaller not because you shrank, but because the room expanded without you. Even fatigue feels scheduled, arriving on time, leaving just enough strength to continue. You accept that survival has become your full-time role and there are no promotions left. You stop counting losses individually because together they have become the environment you breathe without noticing. Conversations shorten, decisions preloaded, outcomes announced with a softness that feels rehearsed. You notice gratitude has replaced respect, and you are thanked for accepting what you never chose. The system learns your habits perfectly, anticipating compliance the way weather anticipates seasons. You sense your leverage dissolving quietly, not taken, just no longer recognized when you reach for it. Every improvement now benefits someone else first, with your share arriving diluted and delayed. You begin avoiding questions that start with, why? Because answers only increase obligations. A memory of authority flickers briefly, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. You adapt again, smoother this time, surprised by how natural the bend has become. The cost of resistance is quoted clearly, and you appreciate the honesty even as you comply. You realize nothing is demanded loudly anymore because whispering has proven sufficient. Your presence reassures others, proof that endurance can be extracted without collapse. You hear your situation described as managed and understand what has been removed from the sentence. You notice hope arriving only in controlled doses, enough to motivate, never enough to free. The idea of reversal fades, replaced by maintenance, upkeep, careful continuation. You sense the end will not be dramatic, only quiet, administrative, filed correctly. Even anger feels inefficient now, another expense you cannot justify. You move through routines with precision, polished by repetition, emptied of intent. Somewhere above you, ceilings are being raised, and you are not invited to notice. You remain functional, dependable, and contained, the ideal outcome for everyone but you. You realize no one is waiting for you to fail, because success for them does not require your collapse. The system prefers you upright and quiet, producing just enough to justify its own smooth operation. You sense how dependency matures, no longer urgent, simply assumed like gravity beneath every step. Your voice still exists, but it is used mainly to confirm receipts and acknowledge instructions. You stop imagining rescue, understanding that rescue would interrupt workflows already optimized around you. The idea of control feels abstract now, something you once read about rather than practiced. You notice how easily tomorrow copies today, each day stamped from the same worn mold. Even resistance fantasies fade, replaced by checklists and carefully timed compliance. You function efficiently, predictably, a reliable component rather than a thinking center. Others call this stability, and you no longer argue with definitions that no longer include you. The horizon remains visible but unreachable, like scenery painted onto a wall. You understand the fights were never meant to be won, only prolonged until ownership changed. Your collapse was not dramatic, because it never needed to happen all at once. Control slipped away gradually, disguised as cooperation, professionalism, and patience. By the time you noticed, resistance would have required more strength than survival allows. You remain active, solvent, operational, proof that defeat can function indefinitely. The system records your condition as sustainable, which is not the same as alive. You look back and cannot point to a single moment where everything broke. Instead, you see a long series of reasonable decisions that led exactly here. You stand at the center of global trade's quiet aftermath, intact, diminished, and permanently dependent.